I'd never heard of Lehman Caves until last spring. My coworker mentioned it after a weekend trip to Nevada, saying it was worth the drive if I ever found myself near Great Basin National Park. A few months later, I was in the area for work, with a free Saturday and nothing planned. I figured I'd take the tour, get some photos, and check it off the list. The visitor center was quiet when I arrived. A ranger at the desk told me the next tour was in 20 minutes. I bought my tickets and wandered around the small exhibits until a group of about 15 people gathered near the entrance. The ranger leading us was a middle-aged man with a calm, practiced voice. He went over the rules: no touching formations, stay with the group, no bags inside, and then led us down into the cave. The air cooled immediately. The light shifted from bright desert sun to the soft amber glow of the cave's installed lamps. The walls seemed to close in, then open into chambers with ceilings so high they disappeared into shadow. The ranger pointed out stalactites, flow stone, and something called shields, rare flat mineral formations that looked like stone pancakes suspended in midair. I stayed near the back, taking photos on my phone. The cave was beautiful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the lighting was selective. It didn't just illuminate the formations, it seemed to frame us like we were part of the display. About halfway through, we stopped in a large room the ranger called the Grand Palace. He offered to take a group photo for anyone who wanted one. A few people handed him their phones. I hesitated, then passed mine forward. He had us line up along a railing, the cave wall behind us. I stood at the far right end. He took 2 shots, handed the phones back, and we moved on. It wasn't until the tour ended, back in the daylight, that I checked the pictures. The first one looked normal. Everyone smiling, the cave wall behind us. In the second, there was someone standing right next to me. I don't mean someone from the group had shifted positions. This was a person I hadn't seen before. They were close enough that our shoulders almost touched, but I had no memory of anyone standing there. They weren't in the first photo. The figure was a man, maybe mid-30s, wearing a dark jacket. His face was turned slightly toward me, but the lighting caught only part of it. The rest was in shadow. His expression was neutral, almost bored. I zoomed in, trying to make sense of it. The edges of his jacket were sharp. The lighting matched the rest of us. It didn't look like a glitch or a reflection, but I knew with absolute certainty that no one had been there when the photo was taken. I checked the other people's photos. The couple next to me had a shot from the same moment. In theirs, the space beside me was empty. I went back inside to find the ranger. He was talking to a new group, so I waited until he finished. When I showed him the photo, his expression didn't change much. He just said, "Sometimes the lighting in the cave plays tricks on cameras." I told him the man wasn't in anyone else's pictures. He shrugged and said, "Could be a double exposure or a phone processing error." Then he excused himself to start the next tour. Back in my car, I tried to recreate the effect. I took a few selfies in the parking lot, moving in and out of shadows. Nothing came close to what I'd seen in that photo. That night, in my hotel room, I looked at it again. The more I stared, the more I noticed small details. The way his shoulder angled slightly toward me, the faint crease in his jacket sleeve, the fact that his eyes, though partly in shadow, seemed to be looking directly at the camera. I decided to check the photo's metadata. The timestamp matched the tour, but there was something odd. The file size was larger than any other photo I'd taken that day, even though it was the same resolution. I couldn't explain why. The next morning, I drove back to the park. I told myself I just wanted to see the cave again, maybe stand in the same spot and take another picture. But when I got to the visitor center, the ranger from yesterday wasn't there. A different ranger told me the Grand Palace section was closed for maintenance that day. I asked if that happened often. She said closures were rare, usually for safety checks or lighting repairs. When I mentioned the group photo, she smiled politely but didn't comment. On my way out, I passed a bulletin board with old black and white photos of the cave. One caught my eye. A tour group from the 1970s lined up in what looked like the same spot in the Grand Palace. On the far right, there was a man in a dark jacket, standing just a little too close to the person beside him. His face was turned slightly toward them, half in shadow. I didn't take a picture of that photo. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want another image of him on my phone. When I got home, I backed up all my trip photos to my laptop. The group shot was still there, but something had changed. His head was turned more toward me now, and his expression, still neutral, seemed sharper, like the corners of his mouth were just starting to lift. I haven't shown the picture to anyone since. It's still on my hard drive, in a folder I don't open. But sometimes when I'm scrolling through unrelated files, I'll see the thumbnail flash for a split second, even if I'm nowhere near that folder. And every time, I swear his face is a little clearer.
My name is Luke. I live in Columbus, Ohio. I work from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. at a local insurance office. I'm married, have 2 kids, a golden retriever, and a life that's completely normal, almost boring. I thought visiting Carter Caves State Resort Park last weekend would be a simple, harmless break from my routine. A day trip, nothing more. I've been to caves before. I've walked underground paths, admired rock formations, listened to guides tell stories. I know the drill. So last Saturday, I got in my car, drove about 2 hours east from Columbus, and parked in the visitor lot. The air was damp, smelled like wet earth, and the sky was overcast. Perfect cave weather, if that makes sense. The guide for the tour was a middle-aged man named Frank. He had a calm voice and a worn leather hat. Nothing seemed off. We walked through the entrance and I followed the group, nodding at other tourists. The tour started normally: stalactites, stalagmites, tight passages, narrow tunnels. Everyone was chatting, taking photos, the usual tourist stuff. About 20 minutes in, I noticed a small passageway that the guide didn't mention. It was narrow, half hidden behind a rock. My instincts told me not to go there, but curiosity got the better of me. I lingered near it while the group moved ahead. The opening looked like it continued deeper, darker. I could feel a draft, like the cave was breathing. I swear I didn't go in. Not yet, I just looked. But then I heard a scraping sound. Nothing violent, nothing loud, just a scratch, like fingernails on stone. My stomach tightened. I turned to see if anyone else noticed. The tour group was gone. Frank had continued on, unaware. The scraping stopped the second I turned. I followed Frank, trying to act casual, but I couldn't shake the feeling someone, or something, was behind me. I told myself it was a tourist, maybe someone lagging, but I glanced back multiple times and the passage I'd seen earlier was empty. We continued deeper into the cave, through a series of twisting tunnels. Frank stopped at a chamber, telling us about the formation of the rocks, how they'd taken thousands of years to grow. Everyone gathered around, listening. I tried focusing, but I couldn't. The feeling of being watched never left. At one point, I went to the edge of the group to adjust my backpack. I glanced down a side corridor, and that's when I saw it. A shadow. Just a flicker at the end of the tunnel, far enough that it could have been my imagination. I blinked, and it was gone. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want to sound paranoid. We kept walking, deeper. The paths got narrower, the ceilings lower. My ears popped. The floor was damp, slippery. I tried to focus on the guide's words, the rocks, anything normal, but then the scraping returned. Same sound, same rhythm. I stopped. The guide noticed and asked if I was okay. I nodded. By the time we reached the far end of the tour, I was exhausted. The cave felt alive in a way I couldn't explain. The air was heavier, almost oppressive. People were taking pictures, making small talk, but I could only focus on one thing. That sound, always just behind me. After the tour, we exited to the surface. Sunlight, fresh air, the forest around the park. I laughed with relief, joking about how claustrophobic caves can be. But when I looked back toward the entrance, I saw movement, a figure standing just inside the shadow of the opening, still enough that it could have been anyone, or nothing. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it. The rest of the day passed normally. I ate lunch at a small diner near the park, drove home, greeted my kids, and tried to act like it was just a normal day. But the unease stayed. That night, I kept thinking about the shadow, the scraping, the way the air had felt down there. I couldn't sleep. The next morning, I decided to review the photos I had taken in the cave. I took out my camera and started flipping through them. Most pictures were normal, rocks, formations, the other tourists. But in a few, I saw it, a faint blur behind me, almost indistinguishable from the wall, but it was there, in the corner of the frame, in more than one photo, always in the same place. I told myself it was just motion blur, a camera glitch, rational explanations. That's what I told myself. But then I noticed something else. In one photo, my shadow didn't match my posture. I was standing slightly turned, but the shadow behind me was straight, upright. I started retracing the day in my mind. I remembered stopping at that hidden passage. I remembered the scraping sound. I remembered looking back, and suddenly it clicked. Or maybe it didn't. I didn't enter that side passage, yet the photos suggest someone or something was there. I didn't tell my wife. I didn't tell anyone. I told myself it was paranoia. But then I realized that I'd been followed from the cave. Not physically, not violently, not overtly, but mentally. Through the photos, through memory, through I don't know what. A few days later, I found myself driving past the park again. On a whim, I stopped at a small parking lot overlooking the cave entrance. Nothing was there, no tourists, no guide, no figure, just the forest and the road. And yet I felt it, the same weight on my chest, the same tightness in my stomach. I tried to explain it logically. Maybe someone had been in the cave before me, someone living off the trails, watching tourists. Maybe it was a Speleunker who had gone unnoticed. But then I realized the photos, the shadows, the misaligned posture. How could that be explained? I returned home, tried to forget it, went to work, walked the dog, did normal life things. But I kept checking the photos. Every time I saw them, the shadow seemed closer, or sharper, or different. Always in the corner, watching, not moving, but present. Yesterday, I went back to the cave's website just to see if they had updates, safety notices, tour changes, nothing unusual, no warnings, everything normal. I don't go back. I don't plan to. But I can't stop thinking that someone or something followed me out of the cave. Not physically, not violently, not overtly, but mentally. Through the memory, through evidence that I can't explain. I don't know if it was real. I don't know if it's someone watching or if my brain is playing tricks. All I know is that I feel observed, even in my home. And I know that when I close my eyes at night, I see the tunnel, I hear the scraping, and I remember the shadow. It's been 10 days since the trip. I check my photos every morning. I check the locks on my doors. I double-check the kids' rooms. And still, that unease hasn't gone away. I think about the cave every day. I think about that hidden passage, about what could have been inside, and I think about how easy it is to walk into something ordinary and come out changed and not even know it. Because what followed me wasn't something I could touch. It wasn't something I could fight. And right now,
I'm not sure if it will ever leave me. I just know it's there, watching, waiting, and maybe, just maybe, it's still following me.
My name is Ethan, and I live in Cleveland, Ohio. My life is usually uneventful. I work from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. at a local grocery store, stocking shelves and helping customers. I live alone in a small apartment, and most of my days feel like exact copies of the day before. Nothing unusual ever happens. Last weekend, I felt a sudden urge to break out of my routine. I decided to go explore Hocking Hills Caves, a place I had visited before for hikes but had never ventured into the deeper tunnels. I thought it would be a simple one-day trip, a break from my monotonous life. The entrance to the cave was small, almost easy to miss from the parking lot. A few tourists were milling around, but I decided to take a less traveled path alone. The air inside smelled damp and earthy, and my shoes squeaked slightly on the wet stone floor. At first, everything felt normal. I walked slowly, taking in the formations, careful not to slip. The tunnels twisted and turned, and after about 15 minutes, I realized I had lost track of the main path. The cave was quieter than I expected, eerily still, almost like it wasn't meant for people at all. I reached a narrow tunnel that bent sharply to the right. I paused and aimed my flashlight down it. At first, the beam hit a wall, but then I saw that it opened up again farther ahead. I hesitated. Somewhere deep inside, I could hear a faint dripping sound. I stepped forward, then another step. My flashlight flickered, but I shook it and continued. That's when I felt it, a draft of cold air that didn't match the rest of the cave, subtle but unmistakable. I stopped and listened. Nothing. No footsteps, no voices, just the sound of water dripping somewhere in the dark. I walked deeper into the tunnel. After a while, something strange became apparent. The passages seemed to repeat themselves. I recognized a particular rock formation, and a few steps later, I saw it again. Then again. I stopped. I turned around. The tunnel behind me looked identical. I laughed nervously, telling myself I was imagining it. I checked my flashlight. Batteries were fine. I walked forward again. The tunnel bent, then straightened. I swore I saw the same markings on the walls I had just passed, but that was impossible. I hadn't turned around. A faint scratching echoed in the distance. I froze. My flashlight shook slightly in my hand. The sound wasn't regular like dripping water. It was deliberate, slow, scraping along stone. I called out, but my voice was swallowed instantly by the cavern. I walked faster. The passages seemed unnaturally long. My footsteps echoed loudly, and I realized I hadn't seen or heard another person for a long time. The cave wasn't crowded. It wasn't empty. It was like I was the only person who had ever entered. I tried retracing my steps to find the way out, but the tunnels refused to make sense. Every turn led to another turn I had already passed. The same jagged walls, the same dripping water. My head started spinning. My pulse quickened. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a shadow, a trick of the light, but it was shaped like a person, standing at the far end of the corridor, not moving, not breathing, I think. I raised my flashlight. Nothing. It vanished. I ran. I don't even know how long. My shoes slipped. My hands scraped against the rocks. My flashlight flickered again. The scratching returned, closer this time. Behind me? Ahead? I didn't know. The tunnel seemed endless. After what felt like hours, I stumbled into a slightly wider chamber. I collapsed against the wall, trying to catch my breath. I shined my flashlight in every direction. That's when I noticed faint footprints in the dust. Not mine. Small, deliberate, as if someone had walked slowly just ahead of me. I followed them instinctively. Each footprint led to another corridor. I thought maybe they would lead me out, but then they disappeared. The walls were smooth again. No marks, no clues, nothing. I yelled. Nothing. Just the sound of dripping water echoing off the stone. My flashlight dimmed again. Panic rose inside me. I ran blindly, turning corners at random. I stumbled and hit my head on a low ceiling. The world spun. My heart raced. Finally, I found a small chamber. I leaned against the wall, trying to calm myself. My flashlight flickered one last time and went out. I was in complete darkness. I froze. The cold air pressed heavily against my face. Then I heard it again. The scratching. Slow, deliberate, circling the chamber. I didn't move. I couldn't. My mind screamed. Then came a faint whisper. I don't know what it said. It sounded like my name, or maybe it wasn't. My own echo? I couldn't tell. I fumbled with the flashlight. When it finally clicked back on, the chamber was empty. I stumbled through the tunnels again, desperately searching for an exit. Finally, after what felt like hours, I saw light. Daylight, fresh air, relief. I ran out of the cave and didn't stop until I reached my car, hands shaking, heart pounding. I didn't look back. That night, I tried to convince myself it was just exhaustion or disorientation. But then I checked the photos I had taken. My flashlight had captured faint shadows, always in the same corner of the frame, shapes that shouldn't have been there, not clearly defined, but deliberate. I never went back. I haven't told anyone. I don't know what followed me, if anything. I can't explain it logically, but every night since the trip, I feel like I'm being watched. Even in my apartment, awake or asleep, I feel something behind me, just out of sight. I thought caves were predictable, safe, boring. I was wrong. The tunnels, they never end. And I don't know if I ever left.
I still don't know if anyone will believe me. I don't even know if I believe it myself. I'm not a dramatic person. I live a normal life. I work a 9-to-5 office job. I have a small house in a suburban neighborhood. I scroll through social media, watch shows, go out for coffee with friends. That's it, nothing unusual. Last fall, my friend Sarah suggested we take a weekend trip to a cave about 2 hours from the city. She's always been the adventurous type. I agreed, thinking it would be easy, just a simple day trip. We arrived mid-morning and went straight to the visitor center. There were a few other tourists milling around, buying tickets, taking pictures. Everything was normal. The tour was scheduled to start in 20 minutes, so we filled out the usual waiver forms and waited. When the guide came to gather our group, she asked for our tickets. Sarah and I handed them over. She scanned them, nodded, and said, "Great, you're all set." Then she paused and frowned, looking at the clipboard in her hands. "Wait a second," she muttered. "What?" I asked. She shook her head. "Your group isn't listed. There's no record that you checked in. I don't understand it." I laughed nervously. "We literally just bought the tickets." "I know. That's why I'm confused," she said. "I don't see your names anywhere in the system. I assumed it was a mistake.
Maybe a glitch in the computer or the scanner hadn't synced up yet. She made a phone call, and after a few minutes, she told us to just follow the other group. She said, "I'll fix this later." We walked in with the tour group anyway. The cave itself was ordinary. Wide concrete walkways, lights along the walls, occasional handrails. Nothing unusual. The guide explained the formations and history. I tried to relax, thinking it was just a weird administrative error. But the oddities started quickly. First, the guide would sometimes refer to things that didn't exist in the part of the cave we were in. She'd point to a formation and say, "This is where people used to mark the entrance to the old tunnel." But the walls were smooth and clean, no markings. When I asked another tourist, they seemed confused. "What are you talking about?" they said. Then came the maps. She handed out folded sheets saying, "Here's a guide for those who want to walk around on their own later." I unfolded mine. It didn't match the tunnels. Some paths were missing, others led to areas that weren't open. I showed it to Sarah. She frowned. "That's weird," she said. I shrugged. Maybe it was an older edition, outdated. By mid-tour, I started noticing things about the other tourists. People who were supposed to be with us earlier weren't in the group anymore. We hadn't left anyone behind, as far as I knew. I checked my phone, no signal underground, but I texted Sarah's roommate that we were fine. Then a more disturbing thing happened. We reached a small chamber that was mentioned on the map as a resting area. Normally, there would have been benches, a railing, maybe a plaque. Nothing. Just bare rock. Sarah whispered, "Maybe they're renovating." I nodded, trying to sound casual, but the pit in my stomach grew. Later, the guide said, "We'll be looping back to the entrance soon." I took out my phone and checked the time. According to my calculations, we should have been almost finished, but the passageways weren't leading us back. I started paying closer attention to the tunnel markers. Some signs didn't make sense. One arrow pointed left toward the exit, but it led deeper underground. Another marker repeated the same name we had passed 10 minutes ago. I mentioned it quietly to Sarah. She frowned. Maybe they're old signs, but her voice sounded uncertain. And then, when we finally arrived at a junction I recognized from the beginning, I saw the receptionist again at the far side of the lobby, standing behind the counter. I waved. She waved back. Then she turned to a coworker and said something I could hear. "I don't see a group of 2 people check in today. Are you sure they arrived?" I froze. Sarah looked at me. "What?" "I think they don't see us as having arrived," I said. We went back to the visitor center after the tour and explained the situation. They checked the system again. According to the records, no one matching our names or ticket numbers had ever entered the cave that day. The system logged other groups fine, but ours didn't exist. We tried to show the email confirmation, the receipts. They shrugged. It's possible there was an error in the system. Maybe someone used the tickets for another day. Except I had watched the guide scan them in front of me. Sarah had been right there. We had walked the paths. We were in the cave for over an hour. On the drive home, I kept replaying everything. The guide's hesitation, the blank chamber, the signs that didn't make sense, the receptionist talking about us like we weren't real. Sarah tried to rationalize it. She said, maybe it's some glitch, but even she looked unsettled. That night, I checked every record I could find. Email confirmations, credit card statements, calendar entries. Everything said we had gone. Nothing out of place. And yet, when I closed my eyes, I kept seeing that blank chamber, that receptionist, the way the guide's eyes flicked over the clipboard like she was reading something impossible. A few days later, I called the visitor center asking to speak to a manager. He insisted everything was normal. He said, "We don't see any issues in the system. Maybe you're misremembering." I didn't tell him that I had the tickets scanned in front of the guide, or that Sarah had been with me the entire time. I didn't know how to explain it. Weeks have passed, and I haven't returned. I haven't even talked about it with anyone outside a very close circle. Sometimes when I check my email or look at a map of the cave online, I wonder if the tunnels themselves have changed or if I somehow stepped into a version of the cave that exists for a moment. And yet, I can't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, was looking at me like I shouldn't have been there. That the system, the staff, the whole place had no record of me and Sarah, even though we were in the cave for over an hour. I still don't know what happened, and I don't think I ever will.
I've never been the type to go exploring caves. I don't like tight spaces, and I get anxious when I'm too far underground. But my sister was visiting from out of state, and she'd been talking for months about seeing Luray Caverns in Virginia. She promised it was well lit, safe, and just a quick tour. I figured I could handle it. We got there on a cloudy Saturday morning. The air outside felt heavy, like it might rain. We bought our tickets and joined a small group waiting for the next guide. He was a tall guy in his late 20s, friendly enough, but there was something about the way he looked at me that felt oddly personal. Before starting, he said, "Stay close to the group, Sam." I froze for a second. I hadn't told him my name. My sister noticed and raised an eyebrow, but I shrugged it off, assuming maybe my name had been on the reservation list. Still, it stuck in my mind. We followed him down a sloping walkway. The air cooled immediately, and the damp smell of stone surrounded us. The lighting was dim but warm, highlighting formations dripping from the ceiling. The sound of our footsteps echoed softly, and every so often I'd hear the murmur of the group behind me. The first few minutes were just history and geology, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something about the space was tuned differently. The echoes weren't normal. It was like the walls decided which sounds to repeat. About 20 minutes in, we entered one of the largest chambers. The guide invited each of us to say a word or phrase and listen for the echo. People laughed, calling out hello or testing, and smiling when the cave threw their voices back to them. When it was my turn, I just said, "Hi there." The echo that came back wasn't "Hi there." It was my voice, clear and distinct, saying, "Why did you come back?" I felt my face flush. My sister gave me a puzzled look. No one else seemed to react, so I kept my mouth shut. Maybe I'd misheard. Maybe someone else in the group had said it at the same time. That's what I told myself. But the next chamber proved it wasn't just my imagination. While the others were taking photos, I quietly muttered a single word: "Check." It bounced back almost instantly, but the echo said, "You're being watched." I whipped around. Only an older couple was nearby, looking at a map on the wall. My sister was ahead, listening to the guide. Nobody was paying attention to me. I decided to test it. I pulled my phone out and started recording a short video, speaking under my breath. "We're at the deepest point right now." I played it back immediately. My voice repeated the sentence. Then, 2 seconds later, the same voice, my voice, added, "Not yet." I slid my phone into my pocket and stayed quiet for the rest of the tour. By the time we reached the exit tunnel, my heart was pounding. I didn't want to look suspicious, but I couldn't stop scanning the group. The guide glanced at me more than once, as though checking I was still there. Outside, the sunlight felt wrong. Too bright. My sister chatted about how beautiful the caves were, but I barely responded. On the drive home, I kept replaying the recording. The extra words sounded exactly like me, same tone, same pacing, but I knew I hadn't said them. That night, I decided I needed proof it wasn't just faulty acoustics. I searched online for echo anomalies in Luray Caverns.
There were mentions of unique sound properties, but nothing like what I experienced. No phantom words, no voices mimicking visitors. I messaged the cavern's public contact address, asking if anyone had reported strange echoes. The reply was polite but unhelpful. We have no record of such an incident. I didn't sleep well. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like someone was standing just behind me, leaning in. The next day, I checked my phone logs. At first, everything seemed normal, until I noticed an outgoing call I didn't make. It was from the same time we'd been in the big echo chamber. The call lasted 47 seconds to a number I didn't recognize, with a Virginia area code. I called it. It rang twice, then disconnected. When I tried again, it went straight to a generic voicemail with no name. I told myself it was a glitch. Phones can do strange things underground. But curiosity ate at me. I traced the number through a reverse lookup. No name, but the location was listed as near Luray, VA. By midweek, something else happened. My sister sent me a short video she'd recorded of us in the cave. In the background, you could hear me speaking. Only in her clip, after I said, "Hi there," there was a pause, and then, faint but clear, my voice saying, "You shouldn't have returned." She thought I was playing a prank on her. I didn't tell her it happened more than once. A couple nights later, I woke up to a notification. It was an audio file sent from an unknown number. I hesitated, then played it. It was the exact moment from my recording in the cave, but cleaner, no background noise. My voice saying, "We're at the deepest point right now," followed by, "Not yet." Only in this version, after "not yet," there was one more sentence. Soon. I deleted the file immediately, but I couldn't shake the thought that it wasn't just an echo in that cave. It was something or someone using my own voice to talk to me. The last thing I've done about it was drive back toward Luray one afternoon, telling myself I'd confront the guide, ask him how he knew my name, maybe even go into the cave alone. But I didn't make it that far. 15 miles out, I got another call from that Virginia number. This time when I picked up, there was no delay, no static, just my voice, calm and steady, saying, "You're almost here." I hung up, turned the car around, and went home. I haven't been back to Virginia since.
I never believed in being that person, the one who tells a story that sounds unbelievable but is entirely true. I was just a college student, obsessed with geology and old maps, the kind of person who finds comfort in GPS coordinates and topo lines. So when my professor suggested a weekend trip to explore a remote cave system known as Gray Rock Hollow, I thought it was just another field assignment. Exciting, maybe, but nothing life-changing. I couldn't have been more wrong. The first sign that something was off came before we even reached the entrance. The GPS kept glitching. We had been driving along a dirt road that seemed to stretch forever, and every time I checked my phone, the blue dot bounced erratically, as if it couldn't decide where we were. My friend Aaron joked that the cave had a magnetic personality, but his laughter sounded hollow. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being pulled towards something, though I didn't know what. When we finally parked, the cave mouth loomed in front of us. It was wider than I expected, a yawning slit in the rock face. A cool wind escaped from it, carrying a smell that was both earthy and metallic. The moment I stepped inside, the temperature dropped sharply. My flashlight cut through the darkness in a narrow cone, and the walls seemed to swallow every bit of light that strayed too far. We moved cautiously, our footsteps echoing off the walls. I tried to follow the map we had, but the passages didn't match up. Every turn we made seemed familiar, yet somehow wrong. Corridors that should have let us out twisted back on themselves. A small passageway that looked like a shortcut ended abruptly, forcing us to retrace our steps. No matter which direction we took, we kept ending up in the same central chamber. It was here that the unease really started. I began hearing subtle sounds that didn't belong. A scraping noise, like stones shifting somewhere deeper in the cave. The occasional drip of water, almost like the cave itself was breathing. Aaron said nothing, but I could see him glancing nervously over his shoulder. Hours passed, though I couldn't tell if it was 1 hour or 3. The passages seemed to stretch endlessly. I would swear we had passed the same rock formation multiple times, identical in every detail. I stopped trying to map our progress. The concept of time itself started to feel irrelevant. We tried to call for help, but there was no signal. Even the emergency radio we carried emitted only static. That's when I realized we weren't just lost. We were trapped in a space that seemed to ignore the rules of reality. I forced myself to breathe, to take careful steps. We found a narrow ledge and decided to sit down, resting against the cold rock. Aaron pulled out a small notebook and sketched our route, though it quickly became useless. Every turn he drew seemed to vanish or transform as we moved. I tried to reason with myself, telling myself it was a maze of caves, a natural formation with countless twists, but instinct screamed at me that this was something else entirely. As night fell outside, the cave seemed to become more oppressive. I couldn't see the entrance anymore, and any sense of orientation disappeared. The flashlight became our only anchor, but even its beam felt weak against the darkness. I started noticing subtle changes in the air. Sometimes it felt thicker, almost stifling. Other times it seemed to thin, as if the cave itself was inhaling and exhaling. At one point, we stumbled upon a large chamber with walls covered in narrow grooves, like hundreds of tiny scratches. I couldn't understand how they had gotten there. Aaron said quietly, almost to himself, that the cave seemed to be alive. I dismissed it at first, but even I couldn't deny the sensation that we were not alone. We moved on, trying to find an exit, but every corridor led back to the same central chamber. Exhaustion began to cloud our thinking. I started to doubt everything, even my memories. Was this cave truly infinite, or were we simply exhausted beyond reason, losing our grip on perception? Hours bled into each other, and I began to notice subtle distortions in space. A turn that should have taken us 20 steps seemed to stretch for 50. A wall that looked solid warped as we approached, forcing us to duck or sidestep in ways that made no sense. Aaron whispered that it was like walking through a dream, one that refused to end. By the time we found a small pool of water, I felt completely disoriented. I knelt and touched the surface, and the reflection staring back at me wasn't quite right. I looked older, haggard, with shadows under my eyes I hadn't noticed before. It was a reflection of exhaustion and fear. We continued, clinging to each other for reassurance. We found another passage, narrow and steep, that led to a small chamber filled with loose rocks. We tried climbing, thinking it might lead to a higher exit, but each time we reached what should have been a new opening, we ended up back in the central chamber. I screamed in frustration, my voice bouncing endlessly. I don't know how long we stayed there. The cave doesn't obey time. Days may have passed, or maybe only hours. At some point, I realized we were walking not to escape, but because standing still felt unbearable. Finally, we stumbled into a narrow passage that descended sharply. The walls were slick with moisture, and the air smelled of iron and wet stone. I felt a strange relief, thinking maybe this led somewhere. We followed it, step by step, and eventually the passage opened into a dimly lit tunnel with faint daylight at the far end. We emerged exhausted, filthy, and shaken. The sun was low in the sky, but I recognized the landscape. We had exited miles from the entrance we had used. Somehow, the cave had shifted, twisted, and stretched, and yet we were back on familiar ground. I never went back. I still study maps, caves, and GPS coordinates, but nothing ever made me feel as small and disoriented as that cave. Grey Rock Hollow doesn't follow the rules, and I have no explanation for what happened. All I know is that the cave is never ending. Even now, I sometimes find myself staring at maps, imagining corridors that twist impossibly, passages that loop endlessly, and I feel a chill, as if the cave itself remembers me. I don't know who else has been trapped there, or if anyone ever will, but I know this: Grey Rock Hollow waits, and it never lets go.
My name is Logan Hayes. I live in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I work a standard 9 to 5 at an insurance office. I wasn't looking for adventure, but my curiosity about caves had never left me. While studying maps and old survey notes, I learned about a large cave system a few hours south. Some passages were described as labyrinthine, with twists and turns that could disorient anyone within minutes. I drove alone to the entrance on a Friday evening. The air was cold, and the sun was dipping low, casting golden shadows across the rolling fields. The cave entrance was a modest opening between limestone cliffs, but as soon as I stepped inside, the air shifted, damp, heavy, carrying the scent of stone and earth. I turned on my flashlight and began cautiously. At first, the passages were narrow but manageable. Soon, however, the cave began to assert its dominance. A small rockfall blocked part of the path ahead. I had to step carefully around it, leaving chalk marks on the walls to keep track. Minutes later, I reached a low tunnel that forced me to crawl. The air was tight, my chest pressed by the low ceiling. My footsteps echoed unnaturally, sometimes ahead of me, sometimes delayed, making it feel like time itself was bending. I pushed on, navigating twisting corridors that seemed to reshape with each turn. A passage that appeared straight suddenly looped back on itself. Chalk marks I had left to guide me seemed to vanish or lead to dead ends. Every turn distorted my sense of distance. At one point, I came across a steep vertical shaft. The walls were slick with condensation, and the smell of wet stone was overpowering. Climbing it required careful balance. My flashlight beam danced across jagged rock faces, revealing slick patches that could send me plummeting if I misstepped. After the climb, I entered a narrow tunnel lined with stone shelves and stalagmites. The tunnel twisted so tightly that I had to maneuver sideways, scraping my shoulders and elbows. My hands were numb from the cold and moisture. I realized my sense of direction was gone entirely. I reached a chamber where the ceiling opened just enough for a faint shaft of daylight to pierce through. Relief washed over me, but it was brief. The walls seemed to close in with every step. Shadows fell at impossible angles. The echo of dripping water morphed into something disorienting, as if the cave itself were breathing around me. I tried to retrace my path, hoping to find the exit, but the cave had changed again. Chalk marks led to dead ends. Passages I was sure I had walked before were gone. The cave wasn't static. It moved subtly, in ways I could not fully comprehend. Hours, or what felt like hours, passed. I stumbled upon another chamber, this one filled with small, jagged stones and a narrow ledge above a drop of several feet. I had to carefully step across, testing each stone for stability. One loose slab shifted under my weight, sending a cascade of pebbles clattering down. My heart raced. At the far side of the ledge, a faint breeze whispered from an opening I hadn't noticed before. Following it, I descended a sloping tunnel that seemed impossibly long.
The air became warmer and the scent of wet soil intensified. My flashlight flickered once, twice, and I froze, realizing that total darkness could come at any moment. Eventually, I saw a narrow exit, a thin line of evening sky through the rocks. Crawling the last few feet, I emerged onto a small hill overlooking a field several miles from the road I had driven in on. I was filthy, soaked, and exhausted, but alive. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the rolling Indiana hills. I never returned. I still study maps and cave systems, but nothing compares to that disorientation and fear. The cave doesn't follow rules. Its passages bend, fold, and stretch endlessly, challenging perception and testing endurance. I can't explain it. All I know is it waits, silently, and it never forgets. Even now, when I see a map of southern Indiana, I feel a chill imagining the passages still twisting, waiting for the next person foolish enough to enter. The cave is patient, and it remembers every step.